You have to maintain that data. Garbage in, garbage out, essentially. So if you maintain that data and don't forget about it, it's not a set it and forget it thing. Just because you put an item in a system doesn't mean you can't go. You don't need to go back into the item and update. What is my safety stock for this item now? What is my lead time for this item now? What are my reorder points, my reorder quantities, right? What are these different things? It's a continuous loop, like you mentioned. It has to be a process of continuous feedback.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. What comes to mind when you think of engineering change control? Well, if you are a small shop with a few changes per month or relatively straightforward products, then you might not see as many change orders. If you are a highly engineered shop or sell custom products, you might receive change orders even after shipping your products. Heavy on change orders? Then you must need a formalized engineering change control process. Otherwise, you might struggle a lot. So, what are the best practices of engineering change control? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss inventory replenishment best practices. We discussed the nuances of simpler replenishment strategies such as min-maxes to more advanced such as Kanban, bin, and MRP-centric replenishment strategies. Finally, we discussed the advancements in the inventory replenishment strategies such as DDMRP and how that differs from other traditional methods of inventory replenishment. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. For today, we have a very interesting topic. It's called replenishment strategies. There are going to be so many different names there for that. So we are going to have a lot of fun discussing that. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, I am your host, Sam Gupta, principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, I am going to move to Chris for his intro.
Thanks, Sam. Chris Gardini, owner and CEO of Turnkey Technologies. We're a 28-year Microsoft Dynamics implementation partner. Again, lots of involvement with distribution manufacturing companies, a lot of different strategies. We're discussing some of them.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for the intro. Nirav, can I move to you next for your intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Nirav Shah, CEO, founder of AdSers ERP, we implement Acumatica. Planning and replenishment systems is near and dear to my heart. A lot of implementations that we do revolve around proper planning, proper demand forecasting, proper supply planning. So a lot to talk about today, and love to share that.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Nirav. Ebu, can I move to you next for your intro?
So, my name is Abu Asif. I'm the founder here at Penny. We are a Sage X3 partner. We're implementing MRP demand planning in a wide variety of industries, from food and beverage to distribution to just general industrial manufacturing. Glad to be here and excited to talk about it.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Abu. Mark, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Lilly, President and CEO of LilyWorks. Here at LilyWorks, we have a long history with traditional MRP and traditional scheduling. And we've come up with and also use different methodologies to replace some of those. So I'm very excited to be on to talk about how those might apply to inventory replenishment.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. And if you're in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments. We typically try to cover them during the show. If we run out of time, we'll make sure that you receive your answers. On that note, Chris, I am going to start with the first question. And in my mind, when I look at different implementations, everybody's gonna say, and obviously we have the 70-60% whatever failure rate we have ERP. Some people recognize their implementation as a failure, but even among the successful ones, okay, if you look at their MRP maturity, they're gonna say, you know what, my ERP is working, everything is working. But when you look at their planning maturity, they sometimes don't even do MRP. They don't really understand how to do MRP. They don't understand how to do scheduling. So that's the kind of maturity that I have seen with the businesses. So let's say if you were to sort of provide the context in terms of why the inventory planning matters and what is going to be the scope of the inventory replenishment, let's say if somebody want to start on this journey. Chris, over to you.
Sure. I mean, it's a great topic, and replenishment can go deep. And again, we start, and I use that crawl, walk, run. So if you're just getting started, there's basics. I mean, the primitive company, they run out of stuff, they order it. The problem with that, lead times, customer service, again, you're generating lots of extra POs. So that's a reactive replenishment, and it's terrible because you're gonna lose a lot of efficiency and time in business. So again, as you get into strategies, everybody hears about min max. What's the easiest replenishment to use? Hey, when I get to this level, buy more, buy more, because before this level gets to zero, the vendor can ship me more. So there's a real principle there, right? Gets here, order more. So again, you get a little time factor there. Time is a big factor in calculating and planning these things. And so the devil's in the details. And so if you think about min max as a standard replenishment, there's a lot of companies that can manage a large portion of their inventory, non-manufactured items, for example, or maybe with a min max. They're finished goods, they buy them, they resell them, right? Now the other thing you rationalize there is if you look at what's the revenue, what's the dollar of capital to put in a warehouse if everything's at the max. Okay, if somebody needs to know how much money is that, that's 50 million. Okay, lower my maxes or whatever, and then you end up buying more frequently instead of stocking and having longer lead times. So again, there's a lot of math, there's a lot of graphs and charts here as you look at one item. And actually, the new tools are showing graphical images and using AI to start helping you make these decisions. So the other thing they'll do is surface the top items. Hey, you need to go fix these because they're way off. And as you tune, right, you lose all your exceptions. So that's the future state, but getting there. So min-max, pretty simple. PO generators, they can generate POs based on min-max. So if you step forward into when you need MRP and you think about manufacturers, what MRP does is much more invasive, and that's why it's more complex. And again, you can segment your inventory and manage pieces and grow and do more and refine. But just understand you can't get to 100% instant. It does take time. But in the MRP world, if you think about replenishment and just strategies, and I'll be specific, if I'm manufacturing a finished good, maybe it's per customer order. I make to order. Okay. My replenishment method means you get an order for one, you make one. Great. Now below that, I've got a subassembly. That subassembly could have a different replenishment strategy. Maybe that one I build a stock. Why? Because when I get an order for that one finished good, I don't want to have to build everything to make that one product and it'll take 6 months. So maybe that second item down is a build a stock. And so it could have a different replenishment strategy, like a fixed order quantity. When I need to make that, I make 50. I always make 50 or I make increments of 50. That's another concept of a replenishment strategy called fixed order quantity. So again, that first one is like lot for lot. I mean, I need one, I make one, I'm done. Third level down, I got another subassembly. Guess what? That one, I only make it if I need it. Again, maybe a different strategy there, lot for lot. It's very quick. That means I need 100, I make 100, I need 103, I make 103. So there's no rational. But so again, different strategies as we look at different inventory items and how do I manage them. So MRP again looks at what's on order, what's the demand, what's the supply, what's the component use. So now I've got sources of demand from a manufacturing order and a sub-assembly and maybe a sub-sub-assembly. So now MRP is like, well, how deep does it go? Can it get down 8, 9 levels? I may do an engineering bomb for an aircraft and it's 18,000 lines. And you're like, wow, can't humanly manage that. So this is where those tools come in and differentiate companies that are doing them well, because people can't manage these processes efficiently. You'll end up with longer lead times, etc. So again, MRP, you crawl, walk, run. You can segment your inventory. You can have a whole lot of it managed with this lot for lot or min-max PO generator if you have that tool. But MRP really helps you. And again, it also tells you based on vendors when to create the PO. And again, I can use a 1-year horizon. I can use a 2-year horizon. That's the other thing what MRP does. It can get way out because, again, long lead times, or maybe it takes me 18 months to make this. And I don't want everything showing up on day one if I don't need it until week. So you're hearing me describe complexities. And again, we go deeper and deeper into this. So I wrote a few things down. I think that I've talked about a bunch of them. So, warehouse architecture is another one. I'll leave that for some questions.
Yeah, so great start. And I really like your approach of crawl, walk, and run. And obviously, that's how you should be starting. But typically, when I work with my customer, and their approach is always very binary when they think of ERP. So either they don't want to do any planning, everything needs to happen in the spreadsheet, or ERP should do everything for themselves. And one of the comments that I typically get, and Nirav is probably going to get kicked out of it, and this is not the first time I heard this one. So this is going to be, okay, hey, you know what? I don't understand all of these min, maxes, safety stock. My planning is very simple. Okay, what I really want is, can I get this inventory for 3 months? Can I put three somewhere, put months somewhere, and can system not order that? Why is it so difficult? So I don't know, Chris.
And again, what we do to help educate consumers is create illustrations. And you look at, okay, if we've got a 3-month horizon, you're like, what's 3 months of supply? Well, you define that. You look at your vendor relationship. Okay, when do I need to order to have that show up? And again, when I cover the 3 months, the order shows up. So again, there's some math that you articulate where you look at the min maxes. And if that's the strategy, or you said, hey, I'm doing a fixed order quantity, but there's some trigger that times it. Now, the other thing we didn't talk about is interesting a forecast. So where does my demand come from? So now I'm going to take a sales forecast. Maybe the forecast is quarterly and I drop in, I need 100 units every 3 months. And guess what? There's no min max in the system. The item has nothing. There's no sales orders. And guess what? That thing's going to say, bump, time to order 300. Or at least keep me at that level. So a forecast can drive demand in addition to a sales order and even an MRP. I could be manufacturing. I have sales orders. I can have min maxes and I can have a forecast. It's all contributing to calculating, and it is a complex calculation. But for simple, you got to start simple and show the math. People have to understand, well, what's an economic order quantity? When I need that, it's going to look at the vendor and what's it going to order? Well, he says 100. Increments of 100. Maybe that's a pallet, for example. But you start with one example and you start simply illustrating. And I think that's the best way to describe it because there is a lot of math in there. And even the computations I've done to rationalize the cost of a min-max or a volumetric expansion of min-max. Well, how much warehouse cube do you have? You can't put all that in there. It doesn't fit, right? If I got a guy that makes blown injection molding bottles, we rationalize min-max totally different based on available to store the products.
Amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So now I'm coming to you. And obviously, I want you to provide the priorities that you wanted to talk about. And that's the another layer on top of what Chris already described, that the formula could be very complex. But in general terms, when you talk to customers, I mean, you are going to talk about AI formulas, but for them, it's a big transition curve overall in understanding how this planning works. And in most cases, they just don't get it right. Because it's very, very, very hard to sort of calibrate these things unless you have deep understanding of those things and really try to use it as a feedback loop as opposed to simply taking as, very simple formula that I'm going to put some numbers and my planning is going to work automatically. So Nirav, over to you, in terms of the priority that you wanted to talk about, any other context that you might have. Nirav, you're on mute if you're talking, sorry.
Yep, do that 10 times a day. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, right? It all starts at exactly, what do you need? A lot of this, before getting out to the ERP, is done by one person or two people. It's tribal knowledge. It's all up here right now, and then now you're supposed to extrapolate that into an MRP and MPS system. It gets a little difficult because someone in their head is thinking, oh yeah, it's 3 months that we need to supply, but they're doing other calculations in their head that it's almost working like an MRP, right? So it's getting that information, getting that data. Data is important here. So if data is good, you're going to get good results. What I see a lot of time is we get the data in, especially during the implementation. We'll get the data in. We have MRP, MPS working, right? Everything is okay. But then 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road, next thing you know, MRP starts kind of breaking down. And they're like, well, this is not how we expect to plan, or our order is late. Well, what happened here? Maybe a vendor opened up close by. He was able to get you that material a little closer. Oh, we forgot to update the lead time. So now we're getting bad MRP data coming out here, right? It's important to understand MRP is as good as the data you put into it, essentially, right? You have to maintain that data. Garbage in, garbage out, essentially. So if you maintain that data and don't forget about it, it's not a set and forget it thing. Just because you put an item in a system doesn't mean you can't go. You don't need to go back into the item and update. What is my safety stock for this item now? What is my lead time for this item now? What are my reorder points, my reorder quantities, right? What are these different things? This is a continuous loop, like you mentioned. It has to be a process of continuous feedback, right? Because if you set it and forget it, MRP is going to break down very quickly. And all of a sudden, those numbers aren't going to be as accurate anymore. Because MRP, right? Think about it. There's so much happening there from a demand and supply standpoint. But just that demand and supply, break that down a little further. You have demand that's coming from dependent demand and independent demand, right? Yeah. Dependent demand, you're coming from sales orders. Yeah, we have lines already booked. We're ready to go ahead and order these things. Let's pop it through the MRP engine. But what about forecasts, as Chris mentioned? Yeah. right? Forecast is looking, somehow somebody's done a historical analysis on your inventory to say, we need to go and stock this item for this quantity for this day, quarter, month, year, right? So now you're planning either to forecast or to customer orders. Now, what about a layer underneath that? What about replenishing other areas in the warehouse? You might have a Kanban system where if a certain bin goes low, you need to kick off a specific bin, replenishment from another bin itself. And if that bin doesn't have inventory, you need to kick that off into the MRP engine to go ahead and make it, right? So there's all these factors in how you want MRP and MPS to run, essentially, right? The order increments of how you're going to order with vendors, right? The vendors, they'll want you to place an order every single day for a piece of one. They're going to say, hey, we want to order once every 2 weeks, and it has to be a minimum of 100, right? That's our minimum quantity. Well, you need a good planning engine to be able to provide that type of feedback and get that purchase order available for this, so that vendor's going to do business with you, essentially, right? Internal transfers. If MRP is set up correctly, you could set up where you go ahead and create a certain situation where you stock everything in a main warehouse, but now you have offsite warehouses where you also need to stock inventory, because it's easier for you to go ahead and geographically manage your customers and get inventory to your customers. So now not only do you have to have MRP run to make product in your source warehouse, but also transfer product to your target warehouse, right? MRP will do all this for you if possible, taking out that human element, taking out that tribal knowledge that a lot of people rely on day to day right now. But if implemented properly, MRP is a very powerful tool, right? A lot of customers, initially they might be scared of MRP and MPS, Apex, right? Type of philosophy, American Production Inventory Control System. I took a number of passes around that on the supply chain management side, but it's really not that difficult. You need to really take a step back, understand how your data is. Do your data need a little cleanup? Let's get that data cleaned up. Let's keep that loop continuing, get that data properly maintained every month, every quarter, every year. So as you run MRP and MPS, you're just going to get the best results out of it, and you're managing exceptions at that point. You're not managing the static data. You're managing the dynamic data through MRP and MPS, right? The system is telling you, hey, a demand due date has changed over here, so go ahead and update the supply due date, right? Try to be just in time. Try to be lean. You're not carrying too much inventory. Maybe that's the goal. Well, MRP will help you get there, right? It's supposed to adjust to moving due dates, shifts in demand, quantities, right? When you should reschedule, when you should not reschedule. It's supposed to do all these things for you so you could concentrate on the business and make better decisions on which vendors to source from, better quality for your customers, and deliver on time.
Okay, so a lot of layers there. Obviously, I can hit it on a lot of different things, but the follow-up question that I'm going to have for you is going to be related to bins. So some ERP systems have bins, some don't. Some sort of pretend to have bins. They are probably not going to have as much functionality. So let's say if you were to talk about bin level strategies, and you sort of referred the Kanban term there, right? Some companies might be using that. So what is going to be the difference? So typically, if you look at the distributions, and I don't know, some distribution systems have bins, some don't. So when you look at the warehouse location, and then you are going to have bin as well. So obviously, warehouse location level, you are probably going to have this replenishment strategy. Are you also going to have at the bin level? Do you have to have that? So maybe you want to touch on, what are the best practices? Because you can go overboard with this. Sometimes we have seen processes where it's just overly complex that they are not able to manage.
Totally. Absolutely, right. And you don't want to overcomplicate it where you're going to slow the warehouse workers down, or you're going to slow the warehouse down, right? You have to look at what is the benefit of the transaction. You have cost benefit analysis of the whole ERP system, right? Does the benefit outweigh the cost of doing these additional transactions, right? Now, if you have a big enough warehouse, and now you have specific people managing specific areas of a warehouse, right? And you're able to only pick from certain areas, you're stocking certain areas, right? You're shipping from certain areas, but the warehouse is big enough where, what we call that is being able to replenish from source and target bins, essentially, right? Because those areas that maybe the material handler for the shipping department is picking from, those are only picking bins, and we want to make sure that they're always replenished because we have a high volume moving parts, so we want to make sure those are replenished. So we set up like what we call like a min-max for bins, essentially. Maybe there's also priorities for bins, right? Which bins you pick from first from other bins, and which bins get replenished from other bins. You set this whole kind of permutation up from all the bins that you have, right, that are dependent on picking bins to stocking bins. So you want to set up the best, most efficient flow so where you're picking from, right, has inventory. And if inventory is not available, you're going to go to the next available bin that they could pick from, replenish, essentially, and replenish that picking bin so inventory could be shipped to the customer. You don't want those picking bins to go low on inventory, slow down shipping, slow down invoicing at the end of the day. So yeah, that's a whole strategy on its own outside of MRP, but that feeds into MRP, right? If set up properly, you want that independent demand to kind of work continuously to pump out product, to purchase product, so those source bins that you're going to get from are always going to be available.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. So, Abu, I'm actually coming to you. And I don't know if you want to pick the topic related to warehouse architecture that Chris wanted to touch. So I don't know if you want to take on that, and maybe you layer in your, experience with bins, how you would like to layer in bins as part of the replenishment strategy.
I'll leave to Chris to talk about architecture. But I think one thing, it's funny. I just got a text from one of my clients. What's the best replenishment strategy that best fits our organization? Like it's just like that sounds weird just as we're doing this. So I mean, there's just so many layers in MRP, right? The hardest part is create like having the data to run a proper MRP, right? Most ERP systems have MRP, but the real challenge is having the data, right? So if you have 4,000 stocking units in your organization, for example, trying to figure out min max for each level, which supplier to order, what's the minimum order quantity for each supplier, what's the picking time, what's the manufacturing time, what's the lead time. It's a lot of data, and you can put in a lot of effort, and there's so many variables around it that becomes a big exercise to, if you're not doing it MRP right now, just to get to the point of doing MRP and then just keeping on maintaining that data. The other point is, whatever you're doing in MRP is based on historical data, right? It's not live data. So for example, you put in 6 months project, you gather all kind of combinations, permutations, you have MRP data, and you're in a food and beverage industry, for example. Guess what? There's a drought happened and there's a grain shortage now. And all the supply chain, all the lead time factors, all the pricing, they're all out of the window, right? I mean, even the last 4 or 5 years, suddenly COVID hit, right? So what happened to all the MRP data? Out of the window, right? It doesn't matter anymore, whatever work you're doing it. COVID ends, now you have shortages on port, you have labor shortages, you have container shortages, all of that. Now suddenly what happened to all those lead time, all those data, it's out of the window. So being able to maintain that data, and that's where a lot of times these MRP, the shortcoming around these tools, and people get frustrated around it, is maintaining that data accurately all the time is a full-time job, depending on the number of SKUs for a number of resources, right? And that's where I feel a lot of companies miss out, when they start thinking about running these MRP process. And when they start looking at it, it's like either it squares them off, or they go half-heartedly and it doesn't work, and then they get frustrated afterwards.
Could not agree more, Abu. In fact, I mean, I'm probably going to have a follow-up story there, on your story.
Yeah.
So this is the story related to a customer. They called us, they had a problem with the MRP planning, obviously because of all this COVID situation. They were really struggling. They had to do a lot of manipulation in the spreadsheet. And then we go there and supply chain people are saying, what, we want this to be fixed. And we are looking at the system. Okay, what the hell is happening with respect to planning? So then we look at all of their data sets, and we look at their bombs were all over the place. They were supposed to be more of the make to stock business from the business model perspective, the way they should have configured it. But since the ERP system was really off, I mean, it didn't really do very good. Sort of the transfer, the point that Nirav was talking about, especially when you are talking about warehouse architecture for the distribution business, it's very different, right? You manufacture or assemble in one, and then you are probably going to be shipping to, not shipping, transferring to the other one. So in this particular case, the ERP system was very limiting. So obviously they had to take a lot of different shortcuts. Their bombs were like, they were designed as more of the make to order, and they were thinking that the problem is really in their entity. Okay. So in the entities, I think they had something like 9 months lead time for some reason. And they were thinking their products were coming like, in a year. So there were a lot of different complexity, but the underlying conclusion of the story was that the data was just completely off. It just did not connect from the business perspective. So I don't know if you are going to have any sort of follow-up comments there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the core reason why MRP's project is successful or fail, right? It's the core underlying data. We find either companies don't spend enough time to gather it, or they spend too much time to gather it and it becomes like a 1-year project, right? So now, whenever we go in, it's what we advise is take up your critical items first, right? It's that approach that matters, right? Is it, what items have the most business impact? So that can be dollar value, that can be from a customer experience perspective, and then, start building that MRP engine down to, to your last item. And there are also ABC classification strategies on the distribution side of business where you can classify your product by demand, by dollar value, by impact, and so on. And it's building that. It's more of a live thing, right? It's a running thing. It's not you're going to set it up and then forget about it, right? It's while the time you're setting it up, it may also change, right? So it should be chunk based, in business impact focus based, and then you build your MRP supply chain.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. So, Mark, I'm coming to you, and obviously, you are going to say that whatever you guys are talking about, that's 1980, because in 2022, you should be thinking about MRP 10.0, I guess. And then it gets really technical when you look at different algorithm of MRP and how much they have evolved over the period of time. So, Mark, over to you in terms of whatever context that you might be able to provide.
Yeah, I think it might even go back to the 60s and 70s, Sam. Yeah, so
Please.
what we're talking, look, compared to how things were done in the 50s and 40s and before then, I mean, MRP was definitely an impact. So
yeah.
We, especially with the ability to traverse multi levels of a bill of material and come up with some idea, anyways, of when you might need those sub assemblies or down to the lowest level of it. So by all means, it was an improvement, perhaps a dramatic improvement to the way things were being done manually. And for a lot of companies today who are doing things manually, it is an improvement. On the other hand, folks who have experience with MRP and the folks who have used MRP a lot experience a lot of the side effects and the headaches you get with MRP. One of the most that we see most often is the bullwhip effect, right? Is having too much of certain items, right? And just too little, having stockouts of a number of items. Either the MRP functionality tends to encourage kind of a feast or famine type of thing, and this is true through even in the four walls of an organization, and certainly when you bring in the supply chain. And you heard some of the evidence of this in this conversation, right? You have a need for 3 parts, right? But no, we have a policy here where we don't want to order just 3 for cost purposes, and that's where planning and costing can often butt heads. But for costing purposes, we don't want to order less than 20 of those, right? But then when we get to the supplier's insisting that we only order in lots of 50 or this sort of thing. And that's just a simple example of how, a little butterfly flapping its wings turns into this tsunami of inventory that ends up in your plant or not, right? So when you get down to the tactics of it, where Abu is going right at the end, he's right. You want something that's dynamic. And this is one of the you want to be on top of this information almost constantly. And this is one of the other problems folks have with MRP is that a lot of the parameters that you've set are quite static in nature. Lead time, for example. Okay, just take the example of traversing that bill of material, right? In order to try to figure out or calculate when you're going to need a certain item, subassembly or raw material, 6 levels deep, right? Well, what are you doing? You're looking to the item master at each level to look for a static number, a static lead time to say, how long is it going to take me to get this subassembly, right? It has no idea of how many you're producing. It has no intelligence about the fact that if I produce 2 of these, it's only going to take me 3 hours. But if I produce 200, it's going to take me 3 weeks, right? It's just one static lead time value in your database for that part. So this is another area that skews MRP's results tremendously. So a few years ago, a couple people took a really hard look at this. Carol Patak, who was an APIX national president for a number of years in the 2000s, together with a fellow named Chad Smith, who is a TOC lean type expert. And they came up with an entirely different approach that kind of is the antithesis, kind of an opposite view of traditional MRP. And they call it demand-driven MRP. And what demand-driven MRP is, instead of trying to guess the timing, and that's one of the things with MRP, you're always trying to guess the timing. And if things change, you've got to rerun that program, and then the timing is different again. And so you're constantly doing pull-ins and push-outs of work order dates or purchase order dates and this sort of thing. Okay, so instead of looking at the timing of it, what they decided, the model they put together is to look primarily in the past for usage, for historical usage, and based upon the historical usage and certain variability factors, and this is key today too, because we can talk about MRP and the static parameters and the fact that MRP is driving you towards zero inventory, right? That is the MRP ideal, is free. Aside from safety stock, the ideal in MRP is that your supply matches your demand perfectly and you end up with zero inventory. Well, you don't want zero inventory, right? You want enough inventory for any SKU that you have, okay? So you can introduce the topic of safety stock in that regard, fine. But there again, it's a static value. It's not changing with the changing nature of your demand or supply. So that's what these folks put together. For every SKU, you establish what's called a planning buffer. So you're looking at not only what you have on hand, but also what you have coming in. Okay, and when that coming in, maybe purchase orders, could be work orders, right? And then there's a reasonable order quantity on top of that to establish what's called a planning buffer. And what's neat about this planning buffer is it's like a shock absorber, and it literally flexes and changes as your demand changes. So if you get it's the nature of the values. There's a number of values that support the size of these buffers, right? And you can look into the ERP. Anybody's ERP has these values. They're usage values, some of it's variability values. And so these buffers are established. And then as time goes on and demand changes up or down, these buffers flex accordingly. So if usage goes up, for example, then the buffer is going to get bigger. If usage goes down, the buffer is going to get smaller. And these buffers also trigger replenishment order. So it's really simple. The entire buffer is looking into the future for you. Okay, so it's looking in the past for historical usage, but it's also looking into the future in terms of what you have coming in, and possibly forecasts too. You can incorporate forecasts in this model as well, and in some cases you have to, like for a new product. But we've been there's a number of case studies. So you can go to the Demand Driven Institute. They're kind of a generic site where you can learn about these concepts, lots of videos, lots of case studies. And it's really fascinating, some of the results that folks are getting with this approach to replenish.
So awesome details there. Love it. Obviously, for the customers who don't even understand MRP, and I included, I guess, it's probably going to take one more life to understand the MRP completely. And now you have introduced some more variables there. So I don't know when I will be able to understand those. But the point, there are some very, very, very interesting layers. And I want to touch on one thing, which is the assumption that you are going to have historical data that you are sort of using to come up with your planning buffers. Now, the challenge with that is, unless this system is sitting outside of the ERP system, okay, then you are probably going to be okay. Maybe it sits in the SNOP system, because typically in the SNOP system, these things are going to be easier. Your historical data is going to be easier to maintain. If you had to get your historical data inside ERP system, good luck with that. Unless you are using the same ERP system for 20 years, which nobody uses, you are not going to have historical data. So how is the algorithm going to work again, Mark? Let's say if they don't have the historical data or enough historical data.
Yeah, so great question. You're in a bind there if you don't have any historical data. If they haven't been on an ERP ever at all, then yeah, you're starting out a little bit blind with this method for sure. I think typically the average span of usage you want to look at probably minimally 3 months, and in some cases it kind of depends upon the lead time for the part, right, and the demand for the part, how far back you want to go to look at the usage window. I think 9 months is probably as far out as you typically want to go. So consider, once you're on your ERP and you have that usage information for at least 9 months, you'd be good to go.
Okay, amazing details there. Thank you so much, Mark, for that. So, Chris, I'm coming to you. Comments over comments, any sort
Sure.
of follow-up stories?
Lots. So one of the things that everybody's hovering around in, the static dynamic values in the MRP, right? Well, these aren't working anymore. Business intelligence. So we haven't set it. BI. So the analytics on top of what we're doing is imperative. And then the real cool thing is if you could take the analytics and update the values of your system. So look for it, because that stuff is showing up, but that's a big deal. And if you think about fill rates and, you talk about warehouse architecture, heat maps. Do I have things in the right place? Well, how does that help? Well, that's velocity, but Nirav nailed it. This replenished the fulfillment bins and the two-tier warehouse structures where, and again, what's MRP do? It tells you what to buy, when to release the PO, what to make, when to release the production order, what to transfer from where to where, when to transfer it, what to cancel. Isn't it? What to cancel. So there's a lot of stuff MRP can do for you. And the bin-to-bin transfer is, and again, as you get more elegant, and this is velocity, right? So not everybody needs this. Not everybody has 100,000 or more SKUs. And so the manageability of this, right? And again, you're still segmenting, and a heat map is, well, what do I need to manage first? Meaning, what are your fast-moving items? So if you're looking at your top 50, right? MRP, start there. That's the most important stuff to manage, the old 80-20 rule. So again, how do you crawl, walk, run? But analytics are going to help you know what are those top items, focus on those. And again, the refinement process, everybody said it. What are my lead times? Does that impact cost as you get it? You got to get analytics. You got to say, okay, if I do this, how much more can I save? How much room do I have? How much cash do I have in the bank? What's the economy doing? I've got guys in the HVAC industry that said my inventory went from 12 to 38 million. Okay, now they're trying to bring it down. What's that tell you? They bought everything they could. They violated all the replenishment rules, and it's a grab. So that takes it off the system's capability, right? So now human intervention, right? We're in a precarious supply chain world. So that kind of throws replenishment. Somebody said that the other day, just in time wasn't meant for this time, folks. So JIT doesn't fit anymore. Nobody said that either, but it's very interesting. So the analytics, the bins, all good stuff. What else did I jot down here? Again, the electronic updates. So again, you think about how you get started. Again, I'm a technical guy. I've got a client now, and I do SQL updates to their MRP data because they don't use it today. Actually, they do it. They make all their POs manually. I had a session with them last week, but they have, very complex bills of materials, probably 50,000 SKUs. Okay, more than you can even, hey, go update all the lead times. Well, what we do is, again, technique, list of vendors, lead time by vendor, update every item for that vendor with that lead time. There's a quick way to paint lead time across a vendor. And to Mark's point, as you're analyzing, right, average performance, you got to look at the performance. Maybe the number you put in there isn't right. Okay, that's going to make a big deal because these lead times offsets, right, it's all about what's the capital float that's on balance sheet inventory versus cash. We have conversation about how do we get more cash? Well, you manage inventory better. That's a big part of it. So again, I'm not going to undersimplify the process, but analytics are imperative. And again, pick what you can start with and get that going. I think that's, warehouse architecture. We started talking about that. And as you look at fulfillment, again, you're figuring out how much do I need? How much room do I need? Where's it at? So again, we talked about logistics. We talked about heat map, but again, even replenishment, what are the movements? Receiving. Okay, is that part of replenishment? Yeah, okay. So does a truck come in? Does it go to the dock? Where does it go? Do I do a put away? Yep. Can I fulfill off the dock? So there's a replenishment. And again, now we go back to the sophistication. And again, I didn't mention, so warehouse management, not just warehouse architecture, but the elegance of the warehouse management. Most systems don't elegantly create transfer orders. I mean, Mark's probably mine does, and Dynamics F&O does, BC doesn't. So some do, some don't. But again, the sophistication of your mobility device, right? Because again, you can have the system and tell you to do this, but how much does it automate the work? Does it create the POs? Does it create the production? Does it update automatically this, update automatically that? And again, when you're high volume numbers of SKUs, you can't manage that by people. Again, the sophistication of that mobility app says, hey, I need to go here and get this and move it over here. I got to go in manufacturing, Kanban. I got a picking order to pick to a cart. Okay, that's a replenishment in essence, but you get it.
Yeah, amazing details there. And the one thing that I want you to touch on is going to be what to cancel. I guess that's a very interesting layer.
It is interesting.
So how does that work? I mean, describe the process a little bit there.
Okay, customer calls in. Cancel my sales order. It was a make to order. Oops. Okay. The ripple effect of a make to order. I don't stock that item. I don't build that unless I need it. You think I want to build this $100,000 product and put it on the shelf? Said, okay, hopefully I'll sell that thing he wanted. Okay, that's an example of a customer cancels an order. First example to trigger it. I mean, that's the best case that I have is the customer order is canceled or something happens on the sell side where I don't need those, or it was a mistake. Whoops. And so what happens? I had a fat finger in the sales forecast, and I had 100,000 instead of 10,000. Sorry, guys. There's a PO out there for 100 grand of these, and I don't want it. I had a client, I kid you not, they ordered a $500,000 total fat finger. Because again, you go back to, they were looking at historical usage. It was wrong. There was a bad entry in historical usage, and they picked it up and said, oh my God, we used a lot. Order $500,000. They didn't need $500,000. And so there's a perfect example where. And again, the other thing we're talking about is the analytics on watching this stuff has got to be more real time so that you're exceptions. But 2 horror stories where I needed to cancel order like real quick. It's like, you already shipped it, refuse it at the dock. I mean, there's a lot going on there. We don't take receipt of that shipment. So cancel order.
Amazing details there. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So Nirav, I'm coming to you. Comments over comments, any follow-up stories?
Yeah, no, I have actually a pretty interesting story. And I think Mark touched on it a little bit, talking about it doesn't forward plan, right? Yeah, that is one of the issues with traditional MRP and MPS. So what we did for a customer, actually, they were a big make to order customer. They had 10 or 15 level deep bill of materials. A lot of the lower level components were make to stock, so they're common across a lot of their items. The top level, maybe the first 4 or 5 levels, were make to order. So when they knew they had a project, they're getting close to kind of that project being approved, but it's not really approved yet, right? Things hit MRP once they get into a true demand line. Demand, which is either a job, project, sales order, right? Component lines. That becomes true demand, right? Or you got the independent demand like I talked about. But this was none of that yet, right? We had engineers still creating the bill of material for the top level, but they knew what the lower level assemblies looked like. A lot of those make to stock items. So we then leveraged we call a simulated production order or a what if scenario type of production order where we brought in the bill of materials, right? The top level all the way to the bottom level, even though maybe it was like 80% ready to go, but we were concentrating on the lower level stuff, right? Mainly maybe 1 or 2 of the make to order items, but essentially we're able to check off which assemblies that we wanted to go ahead and see or prioritize in the planning run to bubble up to the surface so we could stay ahead of the project, right? And get those things on the production floor to start manufacturing, start purchasing, because there was a high likelihood that the project was going to come, into fruition, right, and get approved. Versus if we didn't do that and we waited till the project came in, we would have already been late based on the due date that that the sales reps were already trying to hit, right? That never gets communicated back, right? Remember, the due dates is whatever the sales rep thinks that we're going to be able to deliver without a lot of internal conversation with the manufacturing team. Exactly what is our capacity? What are our bottlenecks, right? When actually are we going to be able to go ahead and get this item completed? So we were pretty creative there, and we were able to identify without having it look at the full structure of a bill of material where we pick and choose assemblies from a full BOM and integrate that into the MRP and MPS run and identify those specific sub-assemblies or make to stock from a priority level, bring them up and release them directly from MRP to go and get a head start on it. So I thought that was a big win for this customer. They're able to kind of control their manufacturing process a little better and have better visibility on those projects coming in, right, on the manufacturing floor. So I thought that was good. And I always tell my customers when we're trying to implement MRP and MPS, MRP and MPS is more of an art than a science, right? Every company is going to be different. You're the way you interact with your vendors, the type of materials you buy, right? How far you are from your vendors, right? What's the seasonality of your products, right? All these different things can play in creating that perfect MRP engine. And let me tell you, it's never perfect, right? We just get close enough. And we get close enough where we manage the 80-20 rule, as Chris was talking about, right? Where we are able to manage the business with the high likelihood that we're going to be able to complete on time, get our inventory in on time, go through the standard routine of manufacturing and stocking inventory and outputting inventory and ship to the customer, because then that comes down to the warehousing lead times and all that stuff. But it's more of an art than a science. It's iterative. You have to have patience. You have to have that continuous loop feedback to make sure it's humming. And that the proper departments have visibility into the MRP thing. That's a big misconception that only the MPS, the master production schedule, only holds on to that schedule. That's not true. That should be visible to everybody, right? That should be visible to the buyer. That should be visible to the sales rep. that's putting in the orders, right? They should be able to see, oh wait, you know what, Mr. Customer, we have this coming through on our planning side. We might think that might be ready on this date because we see it being planned out. Let's put a tentative date in there. That should also be visible, right? Upstream and downstream. It just shouldn't be a silo. That information is very beneficial throughout the organization to use properly and maintained.
Okay, so some very, very, very interesting details there. So I am going to have one follow-up question for you, and I don't know how many people really understand the difference between, the role of the forecast, the role of MPS, and how that is going to impact your MRP processes. It could be sometimes all over the place because all of them are sort of going to be impacting each other. So let's say if you were to describe the difference between MPS as well as forecast, and what the boundaries are going to be of each of them when you are sort of planning for your supply chain. Nirav, over to you.
Yeah, I have a very simple example for that. Think of a seasonal business. Think about a toy manufacturer, right? Toy manufacturers will not have customer POs January, February, March, April, May, June, right? They're going to get their POs at the end of the year. They're going to get their POs that they have to produce to the different toy retailers, right? Amazon, whatever it is. It's going to be October, November, December, right? But they need to put a forecast in because they need to start making the millions of toys, right? Beanie bags was a big one, I think, in one year, but that's the only one that's coming to my mind. But they had to start making that up front. They had to start buying material January, February, manufacture them March, April, May, right? Get the containers ready wherever they're going to ship it to so they can start shipping with anticipation of those POs coming in at the end of the year. Now, they don't have the actual POs at the beginning of the year, so they're using a forecast with the high likelihood that they're going to be able to sell the material, right, through historical sales. So they're going to implement a forecast to get the planning engine to run so they could get the components, right, get the inventory stocked. So when the POs come in October, November, December, they're able to just quickly ship out the door, right? That is a real good example of between a forecast and MPS. MPS is going to be telling the system, hey, you got the purchase order now, but we have it in inventory. Let's ship it out. Versus the forecast for the same example is going to be telling the planner, hey, we don't have a PO, but we have a forecast, so we have to make it. Either we're going to make the customer orders or we're going to make the.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. Abu, I'm coming to you. Comments over comments. Any stories?
Yeah, I mean, we had a client where, they were always at excess inventory and, they were, blaming the MRP system. And what we found was they had over enthusiastic sales demand forecast, right? Their sales have always thought they can sell more, they can always beat their quotas, but they never ended up beating it. So, that's a very important factor is, especially when the sales side of the forecast comes in, how can you accurately predict your sales, right? And that, even if you're off like 5-10%, it can just throw off your entire material requirement planning, right? So again, forecast, as Nirav was saying, can vary by the season. You may have this business model where you sell more in Christmas and then less afterwards, and then you have to build all those trend profiles and all of that into the system. But I just one of the comments, Chris was mentioning, about BI systems and the ability to, automate the data entry. So in my opinion, that's the easier part, right? Because you can build some sort of system to automate some, automatically update something. But the point I was making is just to gather the updated information, right? So if you have 1,000 suppliers and suddenly world market condition has changed, that's going to affect 100 suppliers even. Just the effort of reaching out to them and figuring out what's the new lead time going to be is a huge effort on its own, right? And that's where the MRP systems often lack is that dynamic data feedback from the market forces back into them, right? And that's where the most complexity of the MRP system is, whether it's on the demand forecast. Summer went longer than usual, right? So I worked for a big company in the apparel business, and they spent a lot of money forecasting how mild the winter is going to be, how strong. It's a Canadian-based company, right? How strong the winter is going to be, and based on those forecasts, then they order the inventory, the number of jackets. When is the winter going to start, right? But guess what? The forecast changed. Instead of we had a very mild October here, no one was even looking for winter jackets. So it suddenly just changes everything, right? And it's that market forces. Now the vendor can say, either you take up the order or you don't, and it's getting that market data into your MRP system, which I find is the most challenging aspect of developing a good MRP system, and where a lot of companies fail, right? BI systems, again, they're mostly focused on historical data, right? They're reports built up on your ERP system, on your databases. But the BI systems, very few, I mean, even if it's out there, just getting runtime market intelligence, right? They're not connected to any intelligence databases or things like that, right? So it's a process, it's a complicated process. It requires, a lot of manpower to maintain it and, to run it efficiently.
Yeah, so some amazing details there, and I like the bit about correlating your market data, obviously, with your internal data. But the challenge that you are going to get, obviously, with ERP system, as we know, as I commented about the tightness of the ERP data model. Any data that you are going to store inside the ERP system is always going to be harder. The ERP data itself is very, very, very hard to manage. Now, if you are trying to bring additional data elements that sort of don't belong to ERP, it could be even more problematic in general if you are going to keep that. And that's why, and you are absolutely right about the BI system versus some of the other system. And that's why we have the SNOP system. They are really designed for that purpose. And they typically, the output of that is going to come to your ERP system. And they manage all of that complexity where they are going to be overlaying a lot of different data sets. And they are also going to be correlating with your data. But obviously, your data has to be right. Your integration flows have to be right. Otherwise, your planning is going to be probably all over the place. So I don't know, Abu, if you have any sort of follow-up comments there. Agree, disagree, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with you. I think again, you're pointing to one is a technical challenge of maintaining the data, system type, in how to manage integration, and the other challenge is getting the market data from your own market, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
getting the actual data from 1,000 suppliers, right? So those are two different things, right? So it's getting that real-time market data is a harder challenge, in my opinion,
yeah,
rather than figuring out the technical piece to get it into.
yeah.
And that's where people get frustrated with MRP is it's that market data. It's not a feedback from the market into the.
Okay, could not agree more. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. Mark, comments over comments, any stories?
Yeah, I want to talk about a subtle point. Chris actually talked about in his opening comments, and he was describing, kind of down into a level of bill of materials, and the idea of, hey, I've got this subassembly. It's going to take me 4 weeks to build it, or do I want to decide to put that in stock so I can save that 4 weeks of lead time, right? And be able to get my end product out, however many levels up that is, out to my client, my customer, much sooner. So that's a whole topic within demand driven MRP, and they call it strategically positioning inventory. And strategically positioning, not in the sense of, hey, I'm going to have a warehouse in Milwaukee and one in LA, right? It's more positioning it in terms of the structure of the bill of material, right? So you do some analysis with your bill of material and see, how many days of lead time it takes across through and down each level, right? And then you can kind of see and get an idea of where you have the opportunities. Hey, if I stocked this part, how much would the entire lead time shrink, right? In order to offer. So we recently engaged with a couple DDMRP experts that brought a client to us, and working together in a situation where they have an end product that their full bill of material structure and their full manufacturing process is about a 12 to 14 week lead time today. And because they understand the demand driven principles and concepts, they are so confident they're going to be able to have enough of certain subassemblies in stock. They're going to be able to reduce this entire lead time down to a guarantee of less than 2 weeks to have that product. Okay. Now, obviously, the balance here is right. If you have a gazillion dollars and as much space as you need, you can go ahead and stock as much as you want, right? So the challenge is, of course, yes, having enough of those subassemblies at all times, because it'll cost you dearly if you have a stock out, because that lead time is going to come right back at you. But at the same time, not too much, right? So you're controlling how much, so you're making sure you don't have excess as well. And that's one of the big principles and the balance points of this demand-driven MRP approach I've been speaking of, is having enough of any SKUs that you need. So almost 99% sure that you're going to have that, but yet at the same time not having excessive and not having too much, so you're not tying up all that cash in what could be very expensive sub-assembly.
So there are some very interesting details, and I guess one of the details that you just mentioned, there is subtle nuance there, and that can answer a lot of questions and solve a lot of problems that we have been talking about. So are you saying that, let's say, if I have my data off and I may be doing make to order for one of the assembly right now, but let's say if I want to know whether that should be probably stored in the inventory as opposed to making when I get the order, can the MRP system tell me that rather than make to order, you should be treating that as more of make to stock? Can the MRP engine make those recommendations as well, Mark?
No, there's not that I know of. There's not a computer program that's gonna do that for you and give you a definitive analysis. Someone may have it. I don't know of it. But typically, it's a more it's frankly a spreadsheet analysis of looking at the structure of the bombs and their overall products to see where those opportunities.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mark, for that. So the only thing we can take right now is going to be closing advice. Chris, what would be your closing advice, please?
So we're not going to be afraid of this topic. And if we're manually generating POs and production orders today, and you have a tool in your system, look at your inventory, find your most important revenue profitable items. You can put settings in there and run master planning and see what it tells you to do. You don't have to do it. Go manually, create your stuff, run it again, and see if you missed anything. But that's a way to climb into this thing and start getting comfortable. And a lot of the old school guys were like, hey, well, when you show them the report, he's like, okay, that's what I would have done. That's how you build adoption and you move this thing forward.
Okay, amazing advice. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Narav, closing advice, please. You're on mute, Narav. 11th time.
11th time today. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I would say companies that are using MRP and MPS that are kind of feeling a little down and low about that, it's not working well for them. Look at your data. Right, you need that continuous feedback loop. Let's look at, try to create some BI around that to update that data. What we haven't even talked about is other technologies within the warehouse that could also make your MRP runs even much more efficient. RFID tags on inventory, right, that they feed back into MRP and MPS. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Don't shy away from it, right? Open the door there, and you're going to see a lot more visibility into your business than you thought you knew.
Okay, amazing advice. Thank you so much, Narav, for that. Abu, what is going to be your closing advice, please?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Chris's comments, right? Start small, look at your, most impactful items, and then start building your MRP system, from that point onward.
Could not agree more. Thank you so much, Abu, for that advice. Mark, closing advice, please.
Yeah, if you're experienced with MRP, if you're not happy with the results for whatever reason, take a look at demand-driven MRP, demand-driveninstitute.com. is the generic site that'll give you a lot of education, a lot of videos about the concept.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mark, for that. So that's it today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all. Thanks, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Mark Lilly, head over to lillyworks.com. It's LILLYWORKS.com. If you want to learn more about Chris Garadini, head over to turnkeytech.com. It's TURNKEYTEC.com. If you want to learn more about Nirav Shah, head over to AdServiceERP.com. It's ADCIRRUSERP.com. If you want to learn more about Abu Asif, head over to pennymanagement.com. It's PANNIMANAGEMENT.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Nirav Shah, who shares his insights into the process challenges of make-to-order manufacturers. Also the interview with Thomas Klima, who shares his insights into the automated testing for ERP. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.